The internet was really damn competitive in the 90s. If you wanted to make it to the very top, you had to not only be really good at what you did, but you also had to show it in the loudest, most flamboyant way possible. But then at the turn of the millennium began an era of massive growth, oversaturation, and market speculation within the online space. There was that handful of people who suspected that the internet would not exist as a novelty forever, but instead would turn into a utility that would become a facet of everyday life. As it turns out, the flashiest, most ambitious website was not what fulfilled people's needs. Instead, it was nothing. In 1997, a prototype for a new search engine began at Stanford University. They called it Google. Now, search engines were already a dime a dozen at this time, but Google was different. Its homepage consisted of a search bar, and that was it. You didn't need anything else to make the most out of your time on the internet. You just needed to type in what you were looking for, and trust that Google will find it for you. It was a very bold approach in presentation, which embodied the philosophy that less is more. It was this that soon allowed a student project to turn nothing into everything. Google's popularity surged, and within just a few years, became the most visited website on the internet. But its influence would then extend beyond just the search bar, and it would soon become one of the most powerful companies in the world. For many, Google is the instinctual answer to most of life's problems, an integral part of their daily routine, even away from the internet. So what did Google do that no other search engine, heck, no other website had done before? And is this something that people will trust forever? It was much more than just its very innovative search tool and minimalism that turned Google into an empire. It changed how we use technology by giving people so many avenues to use it to improve their daily lives, both financially and through convenience. This created a form of mutualism that allowed for Google to increase its capital and better understand its audience. This then helped them make very successful and strategic moves and acquisitions, which would create a sort of snowball effect that would bring an online company to heights that were never seen before. Understanding the magnitude of Google's initial innovation in the search engine space also requires understanding what finding information was like back in the mid-1990s before Google was around. Now, I've done an entire video about all the details of what searching online was like before Google, but in short, the most popular search engines of the time relied on indexing techniques that we would consider to be very primitive today. Because remember, Google was by no means the first search engine, but it might as well have been because of how much better it was. Search engines like WebCrawler, AltaVista, and Ask Jeeves typically ranked page results from greatest to least based on the number of times a given word was mentioned on a page. For example, if I search for Apple, the top result would be the page that contains the most instances of the word Apple that the search engine could find online. Now, of course, there were tiny differences between all these services I talked about before, but this was more or less the standard for web searching back in the 90s. This sounds like a pretty straightforward and ingenious way to organize information in a search result, and it certainly was, given the level of demand and even the kind of expectation people in the 90s had for the internet. But as the internet grew more commonplace, this would start to show its flaws. Search results were starting to become less relevant to what the user was truly looking for. For example, the top search result for Apple may be fan websites dedicated to the company, rather than the top result being apple.com. Because of course, a fan website with its constantly growing blogs and user posts is likely going to mention the word Apple more than the lighter, more straightforward official Apple website. Additionally, this rank system could easily be abused through something called keyword stuffing, where a completely random website may secretly fill their page with the word Apple or another popular search term so that it artificially comes at the very top. these sites would quickly get caught and removed. But still, systematically, it was a game of cat and mouse. So how do you fix these problems without resorting to constant manual intervention? In 1996, two Stanford students named Larry Page and Sergey Brin wanted to take on this quickly growing problem, but they didn't exactly realize this until later on. You see, everything started with the doctoral thesis that Larry Page was working on, which had a pretty different objective in mind. He understood that the World Wide Web was basically a huge network of different web pages that pretty much all connected to each other in some way. It was a digital representation of human interaction, and he wanted to extract meaning from it. The whole idea is that if one website has more people linking to it than others, there was probably a reason for why. It is because people perceived that website as important or useful, and as a result, wanted to refer that site to others by linking them to it. It was analogous to how certain works are cited in peer-reviewed research papers. If one particular work is getting cited a lot more than another work that is similar, the reason is most likely that the first work is more significant or even reliable. By studying this big World Wide Web graph, you could effectively turn qualitative data into quantitative data. Site importance could now actually be measured and ranked objectively, rather than just based on somebody's opinion. Sergey Brin was also intrigued by this concept and decided to join Page in working on this project. Another Stanford student named Scott Hassan then joins in with coding the thing because he was a much better programmer than them. This new ranking algorithm was called PageRank, and the search tool that Page and Brin created for it was called Backrub. Much like how WebCrawler was crawling the web, Backrub was taking these so-called backlinks and rubbing through them, I guess? Yeah, the name wasn't good, but the concept itself was great and showed a lot of potential once it was operational in 1997. The idea behind Backrub was that its technology could be used as an implementation to improve existing web crawlers, rather than being a search engine of its own. Because keep in mind, they are mostly just looking at this as an academic project. Just like with Yahoo's start, the website was hosted on Stanford's online servers, and the server was, funnily enough, built out of Legos. This is because Page and Brin wanted to keep the hardware for the engine as cheap as possible while maximizing their bandwidth and storage. And Legos were the way to do that, since they had decent air ventilation. Backrub started to grow in popularity on the internet as an experimental search tool. And throughout 1997, it got to the point where the bandwidth demand even exceeded what Stanford could comfortably provide. It was clear that this was becoming more than just a research project, and had a lot of commercial potential.
See? Somebody was trying to call us. Yo, Matthews.
Hello? Could you connect me to Sunnyside's Watusi?
Would you repeat that slowly, sir?
I said, can you...
Well, you must have the wrong number. What number are you calling? Well, not so loud. I'm sorry, but this is 555-3759.
Tired of being dazed and confused? Wrong numbers. The left hand not knowing what the right hand is doing. Well, thankfully there's Mint Mobile, the far-out solution to far-out communication. Now you can make wireless calls to anyone on the nation's largest 5G network, including calls to Canada, Mexico, and the UK. Now you can telephone John Lennon or Donovan. Additionally, Mint Mobile is affordable. You can choose between a variety of flexible phone plans, pay for them up front, and even bring your own device if desired. And it only takes minutes. And if you ever change your mind, there is a 7-day unconditional money-back guarantee. In fact, 96% of users say that they are highly satisfied with Mint Mobile's customer care. Now your phone calls can sound like this. Finally! Hello, Meredith. Why, I'm trying to get a hold of Watusi Records in Sunnyside, New York, regarding my order for Odyssey and Oracle. Could you be of assistance?
On your call to Sunnyside, Mr. McCarthy will be back in an hour.
Why, that is just swell.
Will you talk with anyone else?
No, that'll do just fine. Groovy. Golly gee, thanks Mint Mobile. Calling has never been more out of sight.
Stop overpaying for wireless just because that's how it's always been. With premium plans starting at just $15 a month, Mint helps you break the traditional wireless cycle.
Mint Mobile. It's what everyone is talking about.
So they decided to try and sell their algorithm to one of the big search engine companies of the time. Their most promising lead was with the company Excite, and offered them the chance to buy the backrub technology for $750,000. They performed the demo for Excite in a meeting, and were then rejected because their product was too good. Seriously. Excite's CEO felt that making searchability slightly less efficient was actually better for business. And weirdly enough, he wasn't exactly wrong, at least for how things were set up on the 90s internet. Because these free search engines often relied on advertisements for their revenue, a very good search engine meant that people would very quickly find what they needed and would no longer need to be on the search engine website. Less time on Excite means less money for the company. Since nobody was looking to buy, perhaps this was an opportunity for Page and Brin to completely reinvent the business model of a search engine, where high profitability and incredible efficiency could coexist peacefully. An idea crossed their minds that they never really considered. They could just create their own search engine. The demand that their Stanford server was experiencing showed that there was something here, and they eventually did start getting offers from venture capitalists to turn this into a legitimate company. However, the name Backrub wasn't going to cut it. They needed to think of something much better, something that sounded a lot more cool and abstract, but still represented their mission. During a meeting, they eventually settled on a special word given to a very big number, represented as a 1 followed by 100 zeros. This number was called Google, and it was a perfect, hyperbolic, yet fun way to say that our search engine is so good, you could find a Google number of searches with it. They also played with the idea of Googleplex, which is a much larger number that consisted of a 1 followed by a Google number of zeros. But Google was a simpler name and conveyed the same idea just fine. And as it turns out, the google.com domain name was available. Or should I say google.com, because one of their friends in the meeting, Sean Anderson, didn't know how to spell it and didn't check first, so he typed it in like this instead. Which is honestly great, because the domain name Google had already been registered 2 years prior, so if he had known how to spell it, chances are very high that Google would have then been called something completely different. And so, by the end of 1997, when the engine was still in its transitional period of relying on Stanford infrastructure, google.stanford.edu was registered along with google.com. Google was now in the prototype phases of something truly incredible. Now, when you typed in Apple, the top results were not just a ranking of the sites that said the word Apple the most, but instead the amount of times people said, "Hey, check out this particular website. Here is the link to it." In other words, the amount of times it was cited. Most of the people talking about Apple, the computer company, and not Apple the fruit, are more likely to be putting apple.com as a hyperlink on their web pages. Chances are, Apple the company is going to be more popular with people on the internet than Apple the fruit, which would likely be in second place when people type in the word Apple. It is very convoluted, yet incredibly simple. It's like one of those, how do you even figure that out type situations, and it was able to solve virtually every search engine problem that existed with 90s web crawlers. Now, this PageRank system being implemented by Google was public knowledge very early on in the company's history. So why didn't the other web crawlers make their own version of PageRank to compete and effectively squash Google before it had any chance of getting big? Well, there's a few reasons. For one, while the concept of PageRank was public knowledge, the very detailed inner workings of exactly how Google approached it was a trade secret. Their method was very complex and full of so many moving parts that even if someone wanted to make their own version of it, it would be very difficult to create a system that was as capable. This created a bit of a barrier to entry for these web crawling systems, which used entirely different algorithms that would basically require rebuilding the whole product from the bottom up. The other reason these companies didn't make their own PageRank system was because they just didn't want to. Going back to Excite's reason for not buying the algorithm, less people being on their website meant less money for them. They had to give a reason for people to stay, and if the search engine was just slightly more terrible, they would stay on longer and see more ads. This was the mindset of websites back in the 90s. Make something flashy and exciting. Form over function. Then the .com bubble burst in 2001. All of these extravagant websites that were more of a novelty of the time rather than something actually useful ended up losing a ton of their value because their profits could not justify their inflated price. Some of the largest companies on the internet, heck, the world, significantly suffered as a result, except Google. In fact, you could even argue that the .com bubble helped them. Unlike these other companies, even AOL with its quickly aging dial-up system and Yahoo with its quickly aging web indexer, Google was not just writing its value based on market speculation and hype. It actually provided an incredibly useful, evergreen tool that people loved. It also took advantage of the fact that people were already pretty accustomed to the internet by this point. They didn't need to show off a lot. They could make things very simple. All they needed was a search bar. It provided a search system that quickly blew the others out of the water. And by the time the competitors realized this, it was too late. And the .com bubble just added insult to injury. Because even when all of these other companies died, people online were still using Google. By the year 2000, Google was on fire. They start embracing this quality and care for their user services, even adopting the motto, "Don't be evil." Its traffic was not only so much larger than it had ever been before, but they now had a ton of money from venture capitalists, and they had just started a new monetary system that they called Google AdWords. It was what it sounded like, advertisements in the form of words or text that was formatted like a search result and was relevant to the search in question, rather than just being some intrusive banner ad on a web crawler where the ad wasn't even related to your search. So if someone searches for car dealerships in Los Angeles on Google and they get an AdWords link for keys on Van Nuys, it may actually be the most helpful answer for them, despite it being an ad. Keys on Van Nuys. Sorry, that was for my LA viewers. If you get that reference, leave a comment. But AdWords also solved this issue of people not staying around long. Again, with the old system, you often got random ads that were completely unrelated to your search. For example, you might get an ad for school supplies while trying to find a chocolate chip cookie recipe. Again, AdWords changed that on a global scale. But even if they hadn't, that alone was not the most revolutionary part of it. It was their very unique payment model. The advertisers for these often unrelated web crawler banner ads had to pay the search engine for every impression, aka every time it appeared on a screen. Even if someone was on that page for 2 seconds, hardly even noticed that the ad existed, the advertiser still had to pay for that impression. But Google AdWords didn't work that way. Instead, advertisers only had to pay for every time someone clicked on the ad. Your ad could be shown 1,000,000 times. If it was only clicked on once, you only had to pay for that one click. This was a very attractive business model post.com bubble, and Google was very lucky to launch AdWords right before the crash occurred. But what if someone made an ad that was just terrible and nobody clicked on it, but it still got a bunch of impressions, meaning free exposure for them and no money for Google? Well, this actually provided an incentive for both parties to make something very clickable. Obviously, the advertiser wants people clicking on their link, so they will do their best to make a good ad for it. Google wants to make money, so they will do their best to make sure the ad is relevant to search queries, narrowing down the target audience and increasing the likelihood of it being clicked on, and therefore making Google money. You then do this with tens of thousands of websites promoting themselves to unfathomable amounts of traffic, and you have an explosion in revenue. And this is on top of earning capital from private investors. In 2003, Google would then introduce AdSense, which allowed for people to make money off their websites by showing ads on them, thanks to the help of Google providing its resources for that. In return, Google would earn a share of that company's ad revenue. Not too long after, the company goes public, receiving an influx of investors. Then in 2006, Google does arguably one of the most famous acquisitions in history. They purchase a new video sharing site called YouTube for $1.65 billion. Because of its heavy use of resources, this site, for many years, would effectively act as a loss leader that would get Google's name out there even further, and therefore continue powering their revenue. I have also done videos about that story. Following the success of the iPhone, Google then starts making smartphones in 2010, using an operating system they acquired 5 years before, known as Android. So now, you have all these incredibly powerful sources of income that are only snowballing with the site's growing traffic. This is what made Google an empire. But will it continue to be this way for the foreseeable future? Now, Google still is the most visited website, but with whole new systems of gathering or even completely creating new information through artificial intelligence, this could very well change. Now, AI can answer very esoteric, specific questions in very precise detail. I know that AI is a very trite conversation right now, so I will keep that at a minimum, but for that reason, the world's need for something like Google may diminish. Now, they have implemented their own versions of AI, and despite the growing pains that those features are currently experiencing, this possibility of traffic decreasing could still be completely removed from that. Now that it's been 25 or so years since this version of the internet has become part of our daily lives, I think it's safe to assume that many aspects of online literacy have grown since then. So now, it's not unconventional for someone to question what a powerful company is telling them online, or whether or not their intentions are the same as they were back in 2001. This is not to say that you should never use Google or any powerful services, because there absolutely is a time and place for them. But all this time has given people the opportunity, as well as the ambition, to also explore other avenues that provide similar services in what they consider to be the old-fashioned way. A way that was more tailored to relevant queries and less tailored to targeted advertising and individual preference. There are more products and services out there than there have ever been. And so now the responsibility is on us to choose what we give our attention to focus on the things that we think will most benefit humanity's access to information. When you are the product, in a sort of beautiful way, you are more powerful than anything. If you would like to learn more about a pre-Google online world, you can check that out right here, as well as related videos in the description. A special thanks to my Patreon supporters. Check out patreon.com/nationsquid for ad-free video access and exclusive content. You can always buy me a coffee too. Thank you for watching, everyone.